Hello and welcome. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'd like to welcome you all, and this is a global audience across many platforms. I'd like to welcome you all to Atlantic Council Front Page, or hashtag AC Front Page, our premier live ideas platform for global leaders. We've hosted heads of state, heads of government, leaders of international organizations, CEOs of companies, people who are making a difference in the world in many different respects. But I'm not sure I've ever been as enthusiastic about one of these as I am today about the individual we're hosting and what he has accomplished and is still accomplishing in his lifetime. We're honored today to host Dr. Mo Ibrahim, one of Africa's most successful businessmen, and also a world-renowned philanthropist. His Mo Ibrahim Foundation is a leader in governance efforts across the continent, headlined by a signature $5 million prize for African leaders who were elected democratically, serve their constitutionally mandated term, and step down peacefully. What he has said about this whole area of work is so important. One of the quotes of Dr. Ibrahim that I've repeated so often in so many different places is, I came to the conclusion that unless you are ruled properly, you cannot move forward. Everything else is second, everything. I also love the quote, behind every corrupt politician are 10 to 20 corrupt businessmen. It could be more than that, Dr. Ibrahim, but in any case, it depends on the politician. But what you've done in this area of work, not just by the prize, but everything else you're doing, the way that you every day go out and try to make the world a better place, and particularly Africa a better continent, we salute you for that. The prize and the foundation's associated work add needed visibility to the efforts of African civil society and provide a concrete incentive against authoritarian tendencies. Dr. Ibrahim joins us today to discuss the results of his foundation's latest Ibrahim Index of African Governance report, which notably registered its first decline in African governance since 2010. So it's going to be interesting to hear what's behind that. With the historic election in Ghana just yesterday and fraught polls approaching in Uganda, this is an important moment to parse out the trajectory of African governance and the priorities heading into 2021. Dr. Ibrahim has also been a hero of women's cause in Africa. Here I'll give you just one more quote. Women in Africa are really the pillar of the society, are the most productive segment of society. Actually, women do kids, women do cooking, women doing everything, and yet their position in society is totally unacceptable, and the way African men treat African women is totally unacceptable. This isn't a person who parses words. He says things clearly, and I think we're going to be really looking forward to what you bring to us in this discussion with Africa Senior Center, Senior Fellow, Africa Center Senior Fellow Cameron Hudson. I'd like to take a minute to recognize Cameron's stewardship of the Council's work on Sudan, a country whose democratic transition has far-ranging implications. Cameron's writing and analysis is broadly recognized as consistently moving the policy needle on issues such as Sudan's state sponsors of terrorism designation, which the US finally removed in October. And Africa Center convenings with Sudanese ministers, armed movement leaders, and congressional staff, among others, have ensured that Sudan remains front of mind and concern for policymakers. I'm eager to hear Cameron begin what I anticipate will be a very memorable conversation. Thanks to your work, Cameron, for the Atlantic Council. Dr. Ibrahim, thanks to your work on everything that I've cited and much more. I now turn the program over to Cameron.
Fred, thanks very much. And Mo, welcome to Washington, virtually at least, and thank you for being here today. I want to start off by just congratulating you both on the upcoming 15th anniversary of the Ibrahim Foundation, but also on the release last month of your most recent Ibrahim Index for African Governance, which many of us in our field have really come to rely on, I think, as an important source for data and analysis on the trends in African governance. I thought we would start our discussion there because, as Fred mentioned, unlike in previous years, we have seen a first ever decline, but also this year's index looks at the last 10 years very closely. And I think it's a worthwhile time to sort of step back and ask some sort of big picture questions, which I hope we can do today. Looking over the index myself, I think it's fair to say that you could distill some of the key findings of the report into this idea that there's been unbalanced progress, as you call it in the report. And I want to talk a little bit first about what that means to you, unbalanced progress, and reflect on some of the big trends of the last 10 years that the report pulls out. Can you give us your reflections on that?
Well, thank you, Cameron, for having me. It is always wonderful to talk to you. To start with, the index really is trying to quantify the basket of public goods which governments supposed to deliver to their people. It rests on four categories really. One is to deal with security and safety of the people, which is something very important. Then the human rights and participation, freedom of expression, etc. One is the economic piece, the development and the empowerment of supercharging the economy, the growth there. And one is the human development, health, education, etc. And of course, gender issues, etc. The problem, what we have seen there is that continuously over the last 10 years, Africa economy has been expanding, has been growing at a reasonably healthy manner. The human development also has been improving, health, education, etc. Gender rights have been, the issue of gender, women rights have been improving, and also we come from a very low base in that area, but at least we're improving consistently, which is good news. But unfortunately, we have seen that the area of security, safety, rule of law, especially rule of law, deteriorating. And we also see the area of participation, human rights, etc., is also deteriorating. And that is the imbalance which is happening here. It is as if the rulers say, or our presidents say, okay, I'm giving you a little bit more jobs and maybe a better economy, and so please let go of some of your freedoms and your rights. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And what we'd like to see really is progress in the four areas. Governance in general in Africa has been improving. Today, 60% of African people live in a better governed country. We hope to have more than that, but at least life is getting better for more people. But what we have noticed is that this general progress in governance, it has been progressing for the last 20 years, actually, improving governance slowly. Then it started to stagnate in the last 5 years. And the rate of growth started to drop, stagnated, and now this year it went down in general. So we have been raising the alarm over the last few years. We say, guys, we need to do something about this. It is a problem.
Yeah, let me interrogate that point that you just made, because I find it interesting that in your response, you did not mention elections. And I think that in the kind of the media narrative that we have here in the West and in Washington, we see elections as a proxy for governance so often, and we only really, I think, pay attention to, and again, in our mainstream media, to African countries at election time. So whether it's in the past few months, Tanzania, or Guinea, or Cote d'Ivoire, we focus very much on those countries at that moment of time. How much are we missing when we use elections as a proxy for governance?
I think I don't like that. I don't like that. The assumption that every 5 years or 4 years or whatever, there is a moment in the country history where people go and practice their democratic rights. I think people should be able to practice the democratic rights every day of the week. It is about participation. It's about also local governance. It's about really freedom of people, for freedom of association, freedom to form their parties, to participate in the to assume that there's only one event where, you know, Carter will send his observers and the European Union sends observers, and you go and see if anybody's beaten up or not, and then they certify the election as fair or not fair. I don't think this is right, because what about the election commission? Who formed it? It is neutral. What about the register? What about the campaigning? Were people prevented from campaigning for that? It is a whole process. That's why I prefer the word participation, because unfortunately, in my view anyway, this 4-year election became a little bit tainted and abused actually. That's why we prefer to use the word participation.
Great. I want to sort of switch gears and ask you to reflect on some of the big trends that we are seeing right now in Africa. Your report touches on a few of these, but I think there's 3, I think, in particular that I'm curious to get your view on. One is the incredible youth bulge that we are seeing in Africa. You know, many African countries have 60, even 70% of their populations below the age of 30. The other trend is the rapid urbanization on the continent, mega cities forming, people leaving rural areas. And then the last is this digitization trend and the ability to leapfrog old technologies and empower citizens, but also empower governments in ways that are both helpful and hurtful. So I wanted to get your impression on all of those 3 trends, how they are converging and how they maybe are reshaping African governance. I mean, we've seen, whether it's the popular revolution in Sudan or the NSARS protests in Nigeria, how all of these trends can come together, but how are African governments responding to them?
This is a very excellent point you raise. Actually, each of these topics have been the center of one of our conferences in Africa, because we do this annual conference in Africa when we don't have a COVID pandemic or something like that. But youth, of course, this is a big question for us in Africa. It is extremely young continent, and our future really is in the hand of those young people. And that's one reason actually I'm quite optimistic, regardless of the various bad news we see, because this young generation is far better equipped than ourselves to deal with the issues facing their countries. They are better educated, better informed. And when I grew up in Sudan, we had only 2 newspapers, you know, 3 actual newspapers. 2 of them run by the government, and the army had a newspaper, and 1 independent newspaper. There's only 1 TV station, which is just focusing on what the president had him for breakfast, whom did he meet for lunch, you know. It is absolute. There is no these platforms with there's no internet, where you have no access to the news worldwide, etc. It's different picture. So I am hopeful. This young look, I tell you something, Cameron. Sudan, take Sudan, which you are quite an expert on actually. I gave up on Sudan because after 30 years of the rule by the Islamicist, extremist Islamicists in Sudan, 30 years, which decimated any institution, kicked out any secular or democratic professional people out of the civil service, out of the controlled education, controlled industry, controlled business, everything, brainwashed. Those guys who went out in the streets were all born during Bashir time. And that's why I lost hope. I said, those guys have been to this very terrible schooling system and curriculum, which is full of crap. And, you know, they lived in a very xenophobic society. We are done. I thought we are done. You know, we're finished as a country. And then I see all those young people out in the street peacefully. 6 months, the people have been demonstrating peacefully in over 60 towns against a very repressive regime, which has 4 armies, not one army, has 4 armies. That was something really, you know, brought me to tears. I mean, this is wonderful. So I really have a lot of faith in young people. Now, having said that, I hope our governments and our leaders pay attention to that. This huge bulge, tsunami of young people coming up now to the workplace, they need jobs. To get jobs, they need better education. And the education system in Africa needs to improve with time. We need more technical schools. We need people who can fix tractors, who can build roads, who can build dams, who can, you know, this is the kind of skills we need. We don't need bureaucrats. You know, the whole school education system is built about just producing clerks. We don't need clerks. We need dirty hands which are building things. We need to review all that, because otherwise we're going to have a problem. And of course, we need investment to create the jobs.
Well, that's a great point, and one that feeds into a question that we've already received from one of our audience members. This one from retired U.S. Ambassador Hank Cohen, asking, are African middle classes starting to make investments in their own countries, in their own enterprises? So often African capital has left the continent and it hasn't been placed at home. Are you seeing those trends as perhaps a vote of confidence in those governments if they keep their money there?
I think that started to happen. We have to remember, still we have a weak middle class and actually very few successful business people, very few, unfortunately. But I think also the digital revolution created a new environment which enabled people to start up companies quickly, find niches in business to do things. There is so many of SMEs, young companies coming up in Africa, and it is really wonderful. And I hope this COVID pandemic did not kill many of those SMEs, because unlike US or Europe, the governments don't have fiscal space to support business or support individuals, and they are left on their own. So finger crossed, I hope we don't see much damage in that area.
Yeah, let me go back to that point about COVID, because it's obviously the the big issue of the year, as you have rightly pointed out. I think COVID, the pandemic, not just in Africa but around the world, has I think laid bare some of the fundamental challenges and weaknesses regarding resiliency on the continent, not just in the economy but in the healthcare, and I think even in the governance sector. We've seen some significant elections delayed on the continent due to COVID this year. And as you mentioned, the kind of period of unprecedented economic growth has either been stopped in its tracks or even reversed in some cases. what do you see as some of the long-term effects on governance, specifically on the continent, coming out of this pandemic?
I think it is a very important point for us because the COVID pandemic exposed a number of issues really in governance, and not only in Africa, everywhere. You look at the health sector. I mean, we all now recognize health as a fantastic, important public good which governments need to ensure for their own people. In most countries, we have underspent, we have not supported. Cameroon, I was in London in March, April, and May actually also this year locked up. And I didn't know what to say. When every night on TV, I see everybody going out to applaud the National Health Service, including Johnson, the Prime Minister, and everybody. Now, those people have not received any salary increases for three years. They are the lowest paid people in the country. And we denied them even protective kit. We didn't have protective kit. They had the highest ratio of casualty during this, and they are lowest paid, delivering the most important public good. And shamelessly, we go out in the street to applaud them. I think that was hypocrisy. I mean, I didn't like it. In a way, it is nice, at least people recognize them, but it's hypocrisy. And instead of applauding them, praise them. And this was one area, I think, which will stay with us afterwards. We need to realize we need to have resilience in that sector, but because we are very exposed to this pandemic and the next one and the next one. And sounds good. COVID is not that bad. I mean, we could have had something like Ebola or something, something really more deadly. So that would have been another area is the issue of resilience and food security. When we face with this situation, is the economy resilient? Are we able to secure food for our people? There is issues there, and that highlighted, for example, the importance of regional economic integration in Africa. At the moment when international trade stopped, and I need to feed my people, I can get food from the neighboring countries, but we don't have roads, we have red tape, we don't have agreements. So this all kind of nonsense. It's ensured now what Africa needs to do is to be a little bit more self-reliant, more resilient. So I can face this kind of challenges in an effective way. I think we need a plan B now, because plan A doesn't work. This resilient, we rely on a single product, oil or copper or whatever, and then that goes out of market, then we're dead. It doesn't work.
Let me ask you, since you're talking to an audience, well, it's a global audience, but we're here in Washington. I'm curious, how can Western governments, how can donor governments who have relationships with Africa, how can we reinforce this recovery? What are some things you would recommend to Washington or London or to others, trying to both stem this tide of democratic regression that you've alerted us to in your report, and also sort of help to as one of our candidates would say, build back better? How do you not waste this crisis and come out of it stronger?
You're absolutely right. We should not waste a good crisis, actually. It's an opportunity to rebuild. I think a number of areas. First, I'm really disappointed in international solidarity here. There have been a lot of talk, not much have done. And Africa asked for something very simple. Look, we have $44 billion of interest payment, just interest payment in 2020. Can we deal with that? Can we defer something of that? And, that should be extended to 2021. And that's only the public debt, is not the private debt. Not much I'm having. There was a call for action signed up by 9 or 10 European leaders, from Merkel to Macron, etc., together with the African leader, stating that Africa will need a stimulus of around $100 billion. To put it in context, $100 billion is a very small percentage of the $14 trillion the developed countries have, earmarked to support their community, for $14 trillion. And Africa needed only $100 million. I mean, it's just incredible. And then we haven't seen much coming out there. The IMF has been talking about the SDRs. How can we, but unfortunately, the fight between between US and China and the voting right is derailing this discussion. I mean, so silly. So we haven't seen much support, unfortunately. So this area, I hope that people need to realize that. Then you take the vaccine. Like Africa will need some access to the vaccine and also for the ability to distribute that vaccine. And people have to realize this pandemic is global. You cannot deal with it in silos. You cannot say, okay, Washington now is virus-free, we are liberated. You are not. Because if you're never here, it still had the problem. You have the problem. This virus doesn't know borders. And you can only, declare victory when we declare victory global. Otherwise, it's going to come back and come back and come back. So it is in our interest really to protect the whole humanity. And we need to work there in a proper way. And maybe you need to talk to some people in Washington also about how far America First can go in that context, because we need humanity first, actually, including, of course, United States. So that's an area I think we need some cooperation.
Well, let me ask you about that and get you to expand a little, because I think in the last, you were talking about international cooperation with Africa, and I think one of the trends that we've seen in the last 20 or so years is that the world really has taken notice of Africa. And as much as we in the United States have, I think, framed incorrectly our Africa engagement and involvement as a kind of new bipolar war with China, there's in fact a whole host of new suitors who have come to Africa, whether it's the Gulf countries, it's India, Japan, China, Turkey, you name it. There are a host of countries and frankly, a host of governance models that come along with those political alliances and investments that African leaders now, can kind of pick and choose the governance models that they're engaging with. What do you think that is meaning for African governance going forward? These various models that are presented around governance, and how are African leaders reflecting on that and internalizing some of that?
That's very interesting, actually. It's true there are so many actors, but that become only apparent because US almost withdrew out of Africa to a large extent. So it created a vacuum for other people also to come in. But besides that, the world woke up to the fact that this is a huge market and is growing so fast in terms of population and demography, etc. And we better deal with that. So from our point of view as African, it's wonderful to be open to everybody and to be friends with everybody, and we have equitable exchanges with everybody. The problem happens when Africa becomes a theater of proxy wars you see what's happening in Libya. How many fingers are in Libya? How many people are poking their fingers there? Why is that? When it becomes, you look at Djibouti, how many bases are there, maritime bases? Everybody. from Japanese, Chinese, French, American. Why we have all that? This competition between the countries is really unhealthy for us. We have a proverb: when the elephants fights, the grass suffers. So please, you guys want to fight, you go fight away from us. Don't fight on our land. So that's one thing. Now, let's go to governance. Unfortunately, liberal democracy has a problem. And somehow we got stuck in what we had before. Liberal democracy has been always evolving, has been an evolving project. And it had this wonderful time during the confrontation with what was then the Soviet Union, because there was competition and you needed to improve what you're doing because you needed to offer a better model. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there's no more competition. We won this, and the Democrats in the West went to sleep. Unfortunately, that did not help. And we look now around us and we see a lot of issues with liberal democracy. You take your own country. I've always cited your country as a model of a vibrant society with mobility for people, inclusive society, etc., etc. Then people look at the gridlock in your Congress. Then they look at the politicization of judiciary. Even the Supreme Court became weaponized. When people start to say, oh, this is Obama judge, no, this is Trump judge. Excuse me, a judge is a judge, cannot be a drama. I mean, this is resembles now an African country. I'm very familiar with what's going on in new states now because I've seen it so many times in Africa. We have seen all these problems around elections. People refuse to recognize the results of an election. What's happening in the US now is something we're very used to, and for actually improved on it, because at least in Africa, the incumbent never challenged the results. Is a challenger who challenged the results. So you improved a little bit on us in that area, but liberal democracy need now to refresh itself, look at models, why this is happening, what is the rise of populism, why this is happening, what is the agenda there, where we're going from there. We really need to review our democratic project because no longer we can cite the United States as a good example for democracy in Africa. I'm very sorry to say that, and I hope I'm not hurting the feeling of the many American friends on this call. I didn't mean to do that, but this is a fact. Guys, you fell short. But falling short, you're also damaging us because we lost the example, the city on the hill. We're losing that. So you guys need to shape up because this is hurting us. You need to understand that. The issue of governance in Africa is no much different now from these issues even in Europe. There's a big council meeting now in Europe fighting with two key members who are produced a veto to stop the budget because they don't like the expression rule of law. Can you believe that? Europe, which claims to be the cradle of civilization, we have two big countries there saying, I don't want rule of law. Excuse me, is that Europe? So you guys, are giving a bad example. And I understand when many leaders in Africa look at China and say, okay, it's not really a free society. Maybe it is a one-party rule, etc. But at least those guys are progressing, producing economic results, blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's the model we should follow. And that is a problem because I believe that progress and freedom and democracy need to go hand in hand. Uh,
Well, that's a
I hope I
great.
don't upset you, but
Well, listen, that's a great a wake up call to those of us in Washington. I think many of us, share that view that the U.S. step back has really had some knock on effects on the continent, and I'm glad that you articulated that in the way you did. We've taken a lot of questions here from our audience, and I want to bring in some of those. One relates to this conversation that we've been having, and that's about constitutional mandates. There's been a number of African leaders in the last year or two who have revisited the Constitution for third terms or to extend age limits on president. What do you think of that trend? And if it's done legally, is it okay, or is it a trend that we should be worrying about going forward?
I to be honest, I believe really in the regular peaceful transfer of power, because you come to leadership. I mean, you have your 4 years, you may have your second 8 years. By 8 years, you delivered what you can do, and it's finished. You stole now, and you need to get somebody new to run, because it's tough job. On the age limit, I never understood why, if you are an engineer, if you are a medical doctor, or if whatever you are, when you are 60 years old or 65, people come to you and say, "Oh, thank you very much. It's time for you to retire now, because we don't think you can function that well at this age." Is that not what's happening around the world? Everybody at 65, you have to retire because you are deemed that you are old. Why you are a president and you can continue until 95 years old? Why big people, 90 years old, is still staying as, want to stay as a president? I thought president's job is quite tough, actually. So that's a personal view. I really like to see more young, dynamic leaders and more peaceful transfer of power. And the problem is everybody agrees. Then they get in power. Look, somebody wrote a very beautiful statement some years ago in the nice book, actually, who said the problem with Africa and with Uganda in particular is that whoever runs this country wants to stay forever. Guess who wrote that? Museveni. Excuse me? Can you just read your book, what you have written some 30 years ago? I mean, it is a problem. And we really need to face this problem. And I always advocated for young people to come to power. Anyway, I think I said what I have to say there.
Yeah. Let me, we're beginning to run short on time, but I wanted to just, ask you, since you brought up a specific case, we've kept this conversation very high level up till now. But I do want to, as an Afro optimist myself, and I think you are as well, where are the places on the continent that are doing it right, that are getting it right, that are setting the good example, that are the bright spots for you?
I think the many African countries actually are doing quite well. And you see countries like Botswana, like Namibia, Ghana is moving quite well. Angola's changed course and started to move really forward. There's a lot of countries which are moving. Morocco is doing fine, So, of course, what dominates the news is the countries where they have a problem. So you can see Zambia in the news for the last months because they made some stupid stuff. But I'm quite optimistic about the progress we're making in Africa. We have our hiccups, but that's expected. The progress is not linear. Sometimes is hiccup here or there, but we need to keep to push forward.
One final question, and we've taken a number of questions like this from the audience, and I have it, of course, myself. You and I've discussed it before, but But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Sudan, your home country, and a case that the Atlantic Council has spent a lot of time and attention on. You're actually joining us on the same week 1 year ago that we had the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok joining us in Washington for a conversation. How would you assess what's gone on in Sudan in the last 2 years? And as the Prime Minister noted when he came, he thought that Sudan would be a model for other kind of popular revolutions on the continent. Do you share that same kind of view that this could be applied elsewhere, how they've done it in Sudan?
I do think that it is a wonderful example. If it ended up successfully, because we're not out of the woods yet. But if it is possible to have a peaceful transition of power, these millions of young people did not burn a single car, did not break or set fire to any house or any, it's absolutely peaceful. Stood up civil defiance to force out a dictatorship armed to the teeth and has no hesitation of using its firepower. That's a great example. There is also some realistic elements there, which is we could not have a completely civilian government. We are living with a civilian sharing with a military government, so it is an uneasy situation. The military, of course, is reluctant to leave completely, but they play to the tune of the international community, and we'll see how that. My fear really here is another coup by the military under whatever disguise, and I hope it doesn't happen. But that also needs vigilance from our partners, and also we need support from the local powers around Sudan, which all have various interests. We're not out of the woods yet. So let me reserve my judgment until we manage to move. One important thing is that we did not rush into election. And that is a very important lesson. Somehow, all the do-gooders, our friends in the West, think that, yes, immediately we need to have an election without even thinking. Are the parties ready? Are the people able to organize themselves? Do we have a good register of voters? Do we have, it's not just rushing to the ballot box just to get whatever result and say, okay, election fair, and done, we sign off, it's finished. It doesn't work like that. So I like this transition period, which at least give time to democratic forces to organize themselves, and I hope they use the time. Don't waste it.
Great. Thank you so much, Mo. I want to just thank you again for your comments today and for giving us kind of the big picture on where things are going. I want to turn it over to my colleague, Ambassador Rama Yad, to help close us out. But thank you again. I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Cameron, for that nice, warm, insightful discussion. And on behalf of the Africa Center and the Atlantic Council, sincerely, thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim, for joining our platform to share your deep, inspiring vision. Your amazing foundation has no doubt highly contributed to change the African narrative, support governance and democracy in Africa. Yes, democracy, and not as a technique, but as a culture. The world is not too big. Africa deserves it. And America itself is right now testing the price of this. Be sure that democratic values are also African values shared by African people. When I was Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Human Rights in France, I had to explain people that it would be a betrayal of our common human rights vision to consider that democracy is a Western private thing. At this moment, when so many illiberal democracies are flourishing everywhere, I think we should focus our efforts on supporting democratic as you are doing, democratic efforts on the African side in name of common values. As a teacher, every day I explain my students that democratic values are not an external good, but the genuine African tradition. Some would be surprised to discover that those African democratic traditions could even inspire the democratic exercise in Western countries. So that is why the Africa Center is proud to engage across this huge space and was excited last October to announce the launch of an Afro-Century initiative in partnership with leading African development finance institutions, the Africa Finance Corporation, and the Trade and Development Bank. Aim of this to tackle misperceptions of African risk, engage the incoming administration, and shape the narrative, like you, the narrative on Africa. So we hope you will follow that initiative's progress and check our website for updates. Thank you all and see you next time.